People do not watch my videos and they not go out of their way to befriend me. So I think it's a reasonable assumption, especially in light of the evidence that some of my work is purposefully used for um, ill will. That I'm not particularly doing a lot of good by making these videos, but I watch them and I appreciate them and I understand things, new things from watching them. One of the things that people don't like to hear is that somebody feels they're a victim. So I'll keep that part pretty quick. When I was neglected and abused as a substitute for being neglected, the theme was how can you teach peace? How can you offer anybody any understanding? How can you lead the way if you don't forgive the things that have happened to you? Do you expect to be the topic of a political grudge? And I understand this, arises from a certain kind of defeatism that exists in our society. We're not exactly building utopia for one another around the world. And I've often wondered what it was that was being delayed for so long. It was as if the people who feared um, how sort of Hollywood fear of reality had created this idea of the nature of reality being, a hawk diving at a rabbit. There's other things in nature. I saw a video of ducks feeding fish, apparently completely on their own. So there's quite a few things that don't fit into that storyline about the nature of reality being predatory. But I think we all know something about how the Third Reich rose and World War II got started. Tragically for everyone, it became such a brag to have won for whoever the various sides that did win. That war became almost the only way that you could achieve any kind of prestige. If you didn't have veteran status, you didn't have a place in society. They even say that now. The beginning of belonging is to join the Marines. Well, I say there's probably people who know, everybody knows a little about what happened. Adolf Hitler believed this nature of reality stuff. He said that the gleam of the predator will appear in the eyes of man, and he was sort of an example of that. He was sort of the poster boy for the predatory odds, you know, mystique. But all it did was destroy things. And apparently, what um, the city fathers of our societies reasoned was that, well, we'll just let it go. If you think, there's enough for everybody and watch what happens. And they've heated it towards overheating. They did nothing responsible and were all in this uh, airplane crash coming with the climate change situation. And that serves as a metaphor for letting the past go, forgive everything now, and move on. So I'm not really sure that my tapes are really all that welcome. Um, but I think they help me anyway understand what really happened. And that's important to understand what happened. I'm living in a situation where I'm very isolated, deaf, and terribly alone. I've been like mistreated so badly. I have multiple handicaps. When I try to even think about what my life might have been if I hadn't been targeted this way, I come undone. A career, a family, creative life, proper reward and earning. But instead, I'm being used by a criminal syndicate that apparently has the authorization of our society. It's very strange. There's an unusual and aggressive feedback looping from the distant past, forcing me to answer over and over and over treacherous, scripted, shown scripted libels about me, as though it's some kind of mystical program. And it is, in fact, partly a mystical program, and I'd like to discuss that. But my father was a student teacher at Harvard, and he was offered presidency of the University of Georgia. He preferred to take a step down in his life and teach people in the state colleges, universities of Pennsylvania, University of Pittsburgh. He felt they deserved and were entitled to an education. He grew up somewhat poor in Iowa, and he felt very strong bonds with the underclass, partly because of his experience in World War II. He thought public education was in the best interest of everybody. Well, I found a book called Mitsui about the Japanese conglomerate, and they would, to put in the words of Robert Anton Wilson, they were ready for an idea like that because they did the same thing. They took a step down from the merchant class, from the samurai class, which was almost unheard of, but it was a smart move because it recognized the changes in Japanese society at the time. Well, what sort of characters do we have out here by Olympia, Washington? Robert Anton Wilson is still around. Put out something called Anarchic Harmony with some guy, I don't remember his name, but it sort of confirms the Swami Nosha idea of foreign English rock stars balancing their floating uteruses and just sort of taking out tokens to satisfy the collective mind of the horde. And I get into that a lot because of some of the things that they've done that I find very offensive and find difficult to reconcile with the idea of a program intending to bring peace or the end of grudges when it's the perpetuation of grudges through the evil idiocy of pseudo feuds authored by one control tower to create stereotypes of bloodthirst. Well, in the Ukraine, the fight's begun. They've been released, as me as Gabriel once sang. And it looks like a war zone that's a cow hooves war zone. I say cow hooves because that's the storyline that Yoko Ono and the Ouspensky Circle gave about Mount Desert Island. You know, it was a responsible thing to do. If there's an entrapment ring that's running a sort of Jim Jones scenario with the AIDS attack of sexual assassination, advertised like a Venus flytrap, it's responsible to investigate. And they invented a whole storyline as part of a sort of magic show about the whole thing. And now they have this cow hooves war zone, and obviously the sight of dismembered victims of this terrible bloodletting that's raised frightening questions. Why should there be such a persuasive case? I wonder when I see people from the CIA and Noam Chomsky talking about the exaggerations of the Western media who just fall into line with the Putin is evil stuff and not uh, consideration of their point of view, which is somewhat reasonable at times, which is to say that maybe this wouldn't have happened if we had given them a treaty. Why is there such a persuasive case that our attitude and actions contributed to this situation? There shouldn't be. All of our money and efforts should be put into humanizing each other, understanding each other, being diplomatic with each other instead of just building conquest. I get tired of Biden's God bless our troops stuff. He never says God bless our Peace Corps, God bless our diplomats. So it's very peculiar that we have a situation where we have to ask ourselves, why is there this persuasive argument that our actions contributed to this nightmare? And, Noam's intelligence work um, gives a lot of insight into how we're tricked by the things our government claims to have done. For example, I knew that Jesse Helms had um, filibustered the genocide treaty for a long time, but I heard it passed. In fact, I had some hope that if COVID was an act of the um, secret society in the United States with biolabs, that they could be cited for violating the genocide treaty. But Noam says that's not true because we wrote ourselves an exception. We verified the genocide treaty with the exception that it does not apply to us. Oh, and that's supposed to build confidence and faith in us. It's damn near grounds for a civil war. Right? Does anybody in America have not to uh, agree to restrain genocide? I mean, it's unacceptable. But when you look at the situation from the point of view of our society's overall failure to understand each other, you get down to this question of whether territoriality is the issue with the Donbass, for example. And there are persuasive arguments that, you know, Russia feels like we would if China was building up arms in Mexico. But I think ideology has a lot to do with it too. And the aspects of it that don't have anything at all to do with Donbass at all. The Ouspensky Circle's been playing a double game for a long time. The Cowhouse war zone, the idea that boys will be boys, they have to get their yayas out after the frustrations of COVID and so forth. What did they do to me? You see a lot of poison in what they did to me. They lured me to Seattle for protection from abuse and then neutralized me with chemical castration and said they were advocates for me but never provided a sign interpreter at the Sound Mental Health. And then they poisoned me on a camping trip in the mountain. I'm going to the emergency room dental tomorrow about some development. So what gives this idea, strange idea of equity involves poisoning people. I mean, there's already a deaf man. They see me as white. I mean, and what somebody's going to say, oh, we should poison a black person. I don't want that. You know, it's criminal. And but in CMU, they were talking about let's have a barbecue. You know, and saying things like if you wash, we'll be offended. Now, one of the perpetrators of all of this, Yoko Ono, was going around passing out acid that made people feel strongly like the reconciled the female side of the man and the male side of the female, and they had a blended image of John and Yoko going into one another, and Yoko went around implying the woman that was a god was a woman. And the idea of their mystical program was to play off of the line in the sand, like he didn't push himself on Leslie, and that's a metaphor for Hiroshima. The divine intellect is very cunning. And they used Disney magic, and they were calling it a mystical probe of naivete resulting in abortion, and so on. So, they've known that I have a prescription against making a marching charge, I'll march for this, march for that, because I believe we should be trying to understand each other. And, but they put a prior bomb in my face. I mean, and detonated it to watch the sparks fly. And they thought that was really funny. So obviously, there's some pretty serious problems in the way that they operate on the level of recognition of rights. Like they don't go after Norman Schwab to get money for strange people's problems. They come after somebody who they have all on the barbecue and they're threatening to poison, you know, and they already have done it, threatening to escalate. That's crazy. And this comes from the heart of the government in Olympia. Jay Ansley surely must be party to it. I can't get a lawyer. I can't get a psychologist who's willing to talk to me about it, an advocate in the psychology department. It's very strange. And when you look at the name of the KGB officer that Putin came from, it was Andropov. And the Dalai Lama is photographed with a friend of Line in the Sand, Leslie, named Tammy Simon, who has the androgynous aspect and the aquiline nose of Lenin. She could even appear like Lenin at times. So Disney magic and the Dalai Lama play some roles in this symphony of hypnography that's been going on. And it's like a elaborate curtain call from being put on from for what Paul McCartney sees as humanoid bacon. He's making himself out to be King Nazi, spreading clues. I mean, some of the clues are very like Sanskrit. When you walk in downtown from Trumpington, you go downtown in Seattle, there's this across from Municipal Building, there's this strange new building that has a lightning bolt coming down into a church. So, to illustrate the Almighty. And you have to understand what some of this environmental Sanskrit refers to and where it's coming from. In the claim that they mean well. If they really meant well, we would see Biden insisting on spending money for climate change control and water preservation in the third world. We would be talking about teacher retraining and teaching about ecology. We would be investigating the wrong-headed things that have been happening or an organized way to me in Seattle because they used me. I was an important pawn in their operation. We would question the ideas that um, we're all like impersonators of the greater, that lead to the idea that they can pick and choose survivors and get rid of a bunch of us. I believe that we're all important. You know, I don't think the people who learn from each other are plagiarizing impersonators. That's something that Ouspensky believes. They told me this parable of this guy who made sheep conscious and then ate them. When asked why, he said, what good is it if they didn't do it for themselves? And that's the sort of thing that's happening at our universities. The teachers call themselves stakeholders and start following around their students to make sure that they sufficiently woke or they'll be punished. I mean, it's like the subculture of draconian whip holders in free society. And of course, people will argue that if you don't use discipline on people, look what will happen to them. Well, we need to understand what these watchtower people with their obsessive ideas of surveillance, where they laugh and call themselves big sister, really mean for our rights to privacy. I mean, sure, you should teach people to be restrained and careful and tender, as the Pope likes to say. But they don't even try that. Instead, they whip them up to go up and over um, indulge and then trigger a backlash with, a special operation. So to neutralize what they created in the first place and say, see, and then they call back the great wizard like Adonis in Star Trek. Take me back to the Valhalla of the multimillionaires. I have failed to wizen the low and downtrodden. And the people on the ground can't stand anything that isn't in line with their cults. That's the only explanation for why they would do something so hard or mean to someone like me. And it gets obviously encouraged by the backbiting of Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney. They won't even admit that this warrant to exterminate was written about me because evidently somebody says, oh, it's worth a bunch of money. It's like a practical joke. And we had a group in Pittsburgh that you can't get any information about online. It's completely disappeared, but it shouldn't have. It was around for a really long time at the Irene Kaufman Center in Squirrel Hill across the street from Mr. Rogers Church. It was called Guerrilla Theater. The Jewish Community Center would put on these plays. I knew a girl there who believed very highly in practical jokes. And they were all apparently in on the way that the chair of philosophy of education of the university's son was kidnapped behind his back and just turned into a showpiece of um, best friends stabbing him in the back over and over again. And to prove something about the nature of reality. So they could say, see, this is what really happens. And everybody has a grudge. It's whose grudge is it, your grudge or my grudge? And they're going to reconcile all the grudges now by putting a bunch of people off spaceship Earth and get the population down. That's not about destroying our resources. That's not the way to do it. What you do is practice sensible education while enhancing, preserving, and creatively protecting and fertilizing our resources. That's the way to do it. And anything that's not going towards that mindset is some sort of play acting, from the very base idea that performance in battle is the only thing that should earn you recognition or prestige. It's all like a carryover. It's like using the old dog rule of the Germany past in the name of resisting it, and not investing when there's an opportunity in the alternative. We were forced by that mentality into resisting, and that's what's going on again. Instead of taking a mature and healthy appraisal of what was wrong with that all along and changing it, so that we didn't worship the power to obliterate things. And there's something very um, unnerving about the sadism and just the direction of cruelty that came out of Seattle at the instigation of Peter Gabriel. It's a nightmare of sadism, and it's all this Ouspensky circle that came out of Kharkov, Ukraine, and they call it In Search of the Miraculous. Like if we blow up the world, we're all going to be reunited with the ancient twin. You know, I don't think it's very smart. And the use of Hollywood doubles and so on has gotten to be pretty easy to see as a form of deception. It's not that I feel anything is going to change because I made this tape, but it helps me to understand. And maybe if somebody comes across it, can help them to understand. Because Pittsburgh and Seattle and Peter Gabriel have worked together with people like Obama. And they used testimony about my father told by one of his ex-wives, Penny, who was a Jewish lesbian, which is top notch in minority recognition status. But I don't believe she ever really loved him. I think that the whole thing that she pulled was from the avenue, just seduce him and use him. And my father had given his life to change the curriculum to opening doors for black people. The regional director of Amnesty International called him a hero. And that was a group that Peter Gabriel supposedly was working with. And yet there was no checks and balances or internal review on this crazy claim that he was a racist and stuff. The exact opposite of the truth. And Obama was citing Penny's pseudo-intelligence about me to make it all look less ingracious to his achievements than it really is. And that's the kind of attempts to exculpate the civics of the Union from thoroughly illegal activities towards me. And they're not just illegal, they're very suspicious activities.